Yeah. All right, guys. We are very lucky and honored to have Professor Ashley C. Lowe Mackenzie here to present on her research, the economic values under future ecological scenarios of coral reefs for the main Hawaiian Islands. So let's get started.
So hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Lowe Mackenzie. I wanted to give you a little background of my areas of specialties. So I'm an environmental economist, and my specialty is in recreational aspects of natural resources and applied econometrics in econ, that is JEL code Q57. To get very specific. My education is at Oregon State. Yes. And I got my bachelor's in economics at Portland State. In between, there was a 7-year break between going to grad school where I did a bunch of seasonal jobs and did some through hikes, and really fell in love with the natural natural recreational aspects of natural resources. My current research interest is in non-market valuation, climate change, coastal adaptation, public land management, and recreation demand modeling with big data. So a lot of my dissertation focused on using like social media data, specifically Instagram, and understanding the relationship between Instagram and its impact on overall visitation trends to both national parks and Oregon State parks. I'm now moving into mobility data I'm really excited about. And the classes in NREM, I'm currently teaching these two in Black, the spreadsheet business and economic modeling, and NREM 691, which is a valuing nature. It's going to be like more of a non-market valuation course. I'm very excited about it. And in the spring, I'll be teaching the environmental problem solving. Okay, so the topic of today is going to be kind of presenting this work that I've been working in Kirsten Olsen lab, the economic value under future ecological scenarios of coral reefs for the main Hawaiian Islands under an ocean acidification program. I'm really excited to see your guys' feedback on this. This is the first time I've ever presented it in a group setting. So next to the co-authors, I'm trying to see that. Okay. So the motivation behind this work is that coral reefs provide numerous ecosystem services, supporting life from nearly 500 million people across the world. And there is an increasing calls for evaluation of these ecosystem services at the policy level with like natural capital accounting, benefit cost analysis, assessments. So enclaves is a really national United Nations kind of perspective of trying to understand ecosystem services. The frontiers of benefit cost analysis and the natural nature assessment that I'm working on with that looking at the entire set of natural capital that we have in the United States. It's also really tedious process. So calculating economic value is tedious, but important to understanding our the full impacts of the decisions that we make today. And to give you a little background on the how we think as an environmental economist about total economic value, there are two main kind of economic value types. There's use values and non-use values. Use values come from directly using the resource. That could be through consumption of consuming, like let's say the fish biomass that is related to the coral reef's health, or it could be just enjoying it and going to a recreational spot to recreate. There's also option use values associated with that, which is keeping the quality of those locations, the coral reefs, so that you have the benefit to use it tomorrow. And there's also indirect use values that are associated with coral reefs. And that comes through the provision of a healthy ecosystem functioning. So that could be from housing for protection and erosion, and all of those aspects that we don't necessarily always think about when we're thinking of just coral reefs as an ecosystem. Non-use values come from this idea of bequests and existence. So just knowing something exists in the world, can be a value attached to it. My big one, elephants. Love elephants in the world. I love knowing them exist, and I don't need to go see them or even be around them to love that they exist in the world. Existence values comes from this idea, that bequest values comes from the idea of wanting those to continue for future generation. And existence is just the knowing it exists in the world. Now, ecosystems, goods, and services, they break down into various different aspects. So you have the provisioning services, like the coral cover and fish biomass. You get cultural services through recreation and tourism. You get some regulatory services, like I was talking about with the indirect and option use. And you also get all those services in the non-use values associated with the health of coral reefs. Today, I tell you all of this, so to kind of direct what I'm doing in this particular analysis and tell you what value I'm actually getting at. In this analysis, only get at really the direct use of values associated with the ecosystem. And that's directly looking at the recreation through revealed preferences to be able to tie the value associated with the quality and the health of the reef to the actual value. I hope to get the rest, but right now, this is currently what we are focusing on with the analysis that I'm doing. Okay. Previous economic valuations of coral reefs. There's one major valuation, and that is this Caesar paper from back in 2004, and it gets referenced all the time. Currently to this day, on Hawaiian's website, it says $600 million value generated through coral reefs quality. That's coming from this study from 2004 that looked at a survey-based evaluation of snorkelers and divers, so a particular population, pulling out those values associated with those two groups, and then applying it to the general population, as well as including housing and provisioning service within this indirect expenditure. This particular slide, what I want you to focus in on is the type of slide you can compare my number to the number they got. So they get $13.5 million, which converted into 2004 dollars is about 23.7. So you can take that as a concept of the number I'm going to show you today, and whether or not this is a lower bound or if mine is a lower bound. So our team in the Olson lab are built on this study, or built this model with Carla Feze, an economic valuation of coral reefs using site-specific information about locations and the quality at those sites to be able to tease out values associated with those conditions. We did that with a survey of Maui residents, getting a snapshot of the sample of the entire county. And we spatially tied it to these sites, as well as including trade-offs of going and hiking. This is a revealed preference method, so we didn't ask them necessarily what is the value associated with these locations. We're asking you to tell us where you went and where you recreated. And then we pull that out from where you decide to go, the value associated with revealing your own preference of the location you choose. To get into the nitty-gritty of it, in econometrics, this is coming from a random utility framework, where we have this idea that an individual is maximizing their utility by revealing where they prefer to go. And that's going to be based off of the quality and locations and amenities at the locations. So we assume that you maximize your choice by your income over various different exogenous factors that influence the decision of where you decide to recreate. In a long drawn out equation, what that gets is we know the number of trips you decide to take. We know the travel costs associated with getting to that site from your address. We know the site you chose. We know the amenities you chose, the site and the amenities related to that site. If it has snorkeling, and then these green ones are these ecosystem service conditions. So these ones are kind of more very fine. I'll get into the data in a second on varying over these conditions on these sites. And so that includes having the trade-off of being at home, going to the coast, going to a city park, trail, as well as the beach quality and how long it is, how short it is, and the quality of coral reef at that location. So this particular model that was done prior to me entering the lab basically gave us estimates from a snapshot in time of individuals making choices at locations and the value associated with those sites. And what we find is that snorkeling and coral reef quality are important in this revealed preference framework when making a decision of where you want to recreate. That gives us a value we can then pull out of this model that is based on conditions at sites and value across the islands to be able to estimate a total economic value of recreation. Okay, in the background, what that means is that we have one snapshot of condition and time, close to the time we took the survey. Then if we apply changes to those conditions, we will be able to estimate this compensating variation, which in economic speak is trying to estimate the economic measure of how much money a person would need to be given to maintain their level of utility after the quality change. So like if coral reef quality declines, how much will we have to bring you back up to this or to the level of utility you had prior to that change? And so in our case, we are interested in the changes projected of coral reef conditions over various different climate scenarios. Okay, so we're going to use a benefit transfer function. Benefit transfer involves extrapolating estimates determined in one context and applying them into another. Here we have one in Maui. We're going to apply those to the various different islands. We're applying it to coral reefs. It enables us to estimate their economic worth based on existing valuation studies. And it saves us time and money. Instead of being able to have to survey the entire state, we're able to apply this generally over the population that we surveyed. Much of the literature that focuses in this has mostly just done a unit transfer. So they've taken direct values associated with the Carl Lefeze one I showed you to begin with, and then just took it and times it by the population. There we have our economic value. That's how you get the 600 million. But what we have site-specific information. So we can take our benefit transfer function and then parameterize across the entire area by estimating these really spatially explicit information about where projected change is likely to impact communities. So we'll take a willingness to pay estimate from our original population and our original site. We apply it and transfer it to sites across the Hawaii Islands to new populations. So we have to account for those changing demographics. And then we can sum it up into this annual value by first correcting for the income differences between our survey group and the actual general population, times it by the population and the time that we're looking at, a population of individuals older than 18, and then sum it across 365 days. But to do that, we have to gather more information. So this is the slow kind of build up process to gather that information. First, we needed sites and amenities of all sites across the Hawaiian Islands. So we took to Google Maps and administrative data sets in the government and went around and made sure we collected information on each one of the sites located around every single island and identified and made sure that we knew about the amenities available at those sites: restrooms, parking, showers, swimming, snorkeling, surfing, and so forth. We had them do this manually, given overlap in Google API. It was a little bit of a mess, but I feel confident in the amount of beaches and recreational sites that we got. Then we had to decide how to incorporate the ecosystem service. So here we follow the survey or the work that we're building off of. We use the average coral reef cover from Asner et al. In 2020, which was the spatial analysis flyover. The pixels there represent the average coral cover in live coral cover in the area, and the buffer zone are about 300 meters from each beach site to get a general sense of the ecological condition at each site we observe in Google Maps. And then we take the average resource fishes from the NOAA's biomass projections from 2017 to get an understanding of the fish biomass at each one of these locations. And then we have to get population and community information. And to do that, I looked at the finest scale I could get, which is census block information at the 2020 census. and then calculated into these really nice 1 kilometer grids. So over the each one of these distance and how much it is included in each one square, so that we get a real fine scale of population density. Because what we need this for is to determine how long a distance it is for each square to each site across the entire island. And we do that by using this open source routing machine, which utilizes OpenStreetMaps. It's super comparable to Google Maps, which is I compared two different trails, and it gives you basically the same results. And what you want from this is to know how long it takes for an individual to make it to that site from each square, and the distance it takes on roads to be able to make it to that site. And then to incorporate some other really important information about what type of communities that we're evaluating these on, we use census tract defined disadvantaged communities using the climate toolkit from the Justice 40 initiative that came out last year. And we are also interested in the marine managed protected areas and how they overlap with the projected coral reef cover changes, and where we might want to where we want to consider our efforts into restoration. Here we have like population density, and then this red square boxes are the various different disadvantaged communities defined by Justice 40, which is an entire data set that looks at communities across the census tract level and whether or not they have an identified climate, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution, or transportation, water, or water waste and workforce development disadvantage compared to the other communities in the area. So it's a way for us to systematically be able to identify potential communities that may be important for consideration when we're talking about welfare laws. Okay, so we're also going to need to get some defined median household income to make sure that at that spatial level, we're applying the right income ratio and wealth constraint that each individual community has. So these are then linked to each one of those square grids, and you can see with those numbers, those are all the beach sites on each island across all the islands. Okay. Summary statistics. This is how I always feel like I have to show my summary statistics. I need to work on figuring out how to best manage and calculate these two guys. But overall, you see variations about of these grids, and these numbers are the amount of grids we have times each site, and those are going to vary the distance and time to each population, to each potential recreational site that they can go to. Yeah, we have Maui and Oahu. Oahu's the most, that has to, or is it Oahu's the most? No, Hawaii's the most, the Big Island being the most space. And we see variation in our coral cover, our beach, and the number of beaches and snorkels across the island that have reported snorkeling and surfing efforts at those locations. Okay. We finally get to these changes in ecosystem services, and that's coming from other work in the lab through Dr. Lansing Pern with modeling the impacts of climate change on coral reef through the socio-ecological systems using this thing called the Atlantis model, which is part of her dissertation that she finished up last year. It takes these boxes across the Hawaiian Islands and uses climate scenario SSP 1, 2, and 3 with various different emission pathways, and forces those blocks to then consider ocean acidification and warming impacts under those scenarios to produce outcomes on the coral reef biomass underneath here. What I'm mostly concerned with is the nearshore environment. So the only block that I'm taking from is the Atlantis model, where that's projecting a change in the condition in the nearest shore box. So I link each one of those recreational sites to the nearest box that it's located to associate that change in that area. And then I pull out the various different types of coral reef types that are modeled within that Atlantis modeling. And within each time step, figure out how much does it change in the biomass in those areas across a 2,100 period. Okay. Ready for results? Any questions? No? Okay, so we will get right to the results then. Spatially simulated scenarios for the Hawaii's nearshore environment, incorporating the ecological modeling under climate change scenarios. This is what the Atlantis model overall says for all of those boxes in the various different climate scenarios. All not looking that great. Very little difference between SSP1 and SSP2 and 3. A big shift down in like the mid-century where there's kind of quite a bit of just decline over time. So those are the results over the entire system. But again, I'm only pulling from the near shore. And my first result for SSP1 in 2030, what we see here, these colors represent the sites, recreational sites, and the change in coral reef biomass in percentage form. So there's variation across the islands. Again, those checkered areas are the disadvantaged communities that are identified through the Environmental Justice Initiative 40, the projected welfare loss during this time period. And when we compare SSP1 2030 to SSP3 2030, we see some changes in the projected welfare losses across various different locations, a little bit more loss definitely in Oahu, a more very important area, that marine protected area along Hawaii, a big projected loss over in that particular square. And we do this 2050, mid-century, and how those values will change over time. You see there more loss occurring, darker losses in some areas over SSP1 versus 3. Different locations are projected at different loss rates. I see Kauai and the other Kauai kind of seeming unintuitive, but the main huge big benefits over here by Maui. And then my 2,100 massive welfare losses across all communities and all islands. So a little stark, but if we try to look at aggregated welfare, or not aggregated, average welfare loss by island, when we compare the disadvantaged communities to other communities in the area, we have this way to maybe potentially identify communities that may benefit, especially here with all the red. Those ones lose more on average than those that don't. And this is important when considering like the IRA. The IRA has designated quite a bit of their funding to this environmental justice progress, right? And so by identifying them and overlaying them, you have the potential communities and areas that you could direct funding into, and a justification for why. And then the big overall message, and this is where I'm very interested because this is a new problem I've learned in the last week or so working on this. Benefit cost analysis is basically what I'm doing here. And when you project anything across long terms, you have to do this thing called discounting and put things into terms with net present value. And recently, in November 9, 2023, that was big news on environmental economics. We get this circular A4, super sexy title, but it's really a big deal. And it basically is the new federal guidance since 1981, since Reagan, who imposed this whole idea of putting benefit cost analysis on all regulation on all policies, they had a document that required us to use a fairly high discount rate. But with this, we can get a pretty low over time, 2 to 1.1, especially when we're projecting outwards. And this is the federal guidance for states, for federal projects, to determine our net present value when we're projecting it out into the world. Very exciting. The problem, and I'd be very interested in your guys' insight on this, the problem I'm running into now is using population growth under SSP1 and SSP2, SSP3, have very different underlying assumptions with how population is going to change in Hawaii, the state, specifically the state. There are 3 papers currently that use state level projected population growth for Hawaii across the, well, for the whole United States, but 3 different major papers listed here. In SSP1 and SSP2, we have less impacts. We rapidly drop our emissions, and we convert into a more cleaner, greener society, which does impact our mortality rate in a positive way, as well as our fertility rate in a positive way. And the migration in these scenarios has to do with working together as a team, as a global team. So our migration is actually pretty good as well, too. So SSP1 and SSP2 says for Hawaii, our population grows. SSP3, though, is rivalrous world. It's where we build walls and we fend for ourselves and we say, you do you, I do me, and I still want to burn fossil fuels. And in that scenario, mortality is actually higher. We have more impacts. We have lower fertility. And so population growth in Hawaii under that is less. Why does that all matter for my analysis? Well, that's how we times and get to the economic values, we times it by population. So in my new analysis, when aggregating up across all, this is actually variation through time, allowing just summing up across every year out into 2100. But when we get to the aggregation, SSP1 and SSP2 are worse off because there's more people that have more to lose by the projected welfare loss of the coral reefs. And this is my problem right now, because I think that this isn't necessary. This could be easily misinterpreted. Easily. And so I'd be very curious on what you guys think would be a good way to maybe address this. Like my one thing is we have this idea of a value of statistical life. The EPA uses it in its calculations to justify regulation for clean air. We could maybe put that on, add that as a benefit side of more people. Do we like the idea of more people? Either or, yeah, interested in thoughts on this one because yeah, I just don't, I wouldn't really want anyone to take this out of context, but it's just there. Okay, I'll think on that for a second. If we aggregate it all together, it's projected to 2100 about 2.2 or 2.8 billion dollars in 2020 dollars to the residents in either future, that's either SSP1 or SSP2. So massive losses in recreation, but of course this is shortcomings because we're only really looking at recreation, right? It's definitely a lower bound estimate. It only values direct use from recreational trips from residents, so it doesn't do any tourism or housing or provisioning services or any of that. That would have to do an additional analysis. And I'm assuming a really linear sense of utility. Maybe this is what I could do to fix this issue of population. Maybe there are more extreme values when we have this massive high biodiversity loss in our future that may be unbounded by welfare loss over time. what we call as like a fat tail, and that we might not be able to include into this estimate. But the next process, even just chugging forward with this work, would be to look at the tourism side, to try to understand some of the values there, as well as getting at the indirect values from housing, the functioning ecosystem provision, and then also hopefully trying to get at those non-use values that would have to be through some type of survey where you would elicit that type of information. And then I think I might have, yes. Do I have it in all of them? No, I don't. In general, if we look at how much value in one given shot of coral reefs across residents, in my model compared to the other one for the resident side, way bigger, no matter how you cut it. Across these islands, this is the benefits associated with the current level of coral reefs, and they had 13 or 23 million. And we, in this model, clearly rising that lower bound estimate to a new lower bound that is quite a bit higher than that original study. Okay, that was the last, I should have had that included in the original part of there. Okay. I think that was almost my 35, right?
It's very impressive. All right, so we have an online audience as well as an in-person audience. We do have an online question here. Maybe we can take one in-person question first, and then we'll go ahead and alternate with an online question, Ashley. But if you want to go ahead and call on someone here in the room to start with.
Next off.
Go ahead.
So you were saying that you would want to take into account population growth, right? And then, but so that just kind of left me wondering then, in these models that we have for SSP 1, 2, and 3, right, where they're trying to model these effects out into the future, do they really not already account for changes in human population?
They do. And they do like say that they grow, but since like SSP 1, like you reduce your emissions so quickly and rapidly build up our infrastructure through like reducing the clean energy and all that. In the background of those assumptions, there is this population ability to have population growth that isn't hindered by, you know, your less extreme events. Yeah, and that's the new kind of, the old IPCC report didn't have this kind of complexity of this economic and social backing kind of idea. And now with these new SSP, they're trying to incorporate it all. And it's, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, we have an online question from Louise saying, maybe I missed this, but was that per capita welfare gains or losses for the future projections?
Just can Luke, in which one? This one? Is it this one you were talking about? Okay. Yeah, I do. So I am taking, I'm well, so population, right? Yeah, okay. This is aggregated all up across the population with the projected population. So across, yeah, the per capita of population 18 years and older. Because you can get specific in some of these projections and just choose like the ability to live longer and those that are 18 in some of these projection models. So they had it for almost every age group. And like for children, their like mortality, and then the mortality of those that are older to include in that. So I feel like I have to, right? That's what other people do. It's not just me. Other people do it this way. Yeah.
All right. Ernest, and then we'll take another, there's another online question.
Sweet. Thank you so much for the talk, Ashley. I know we met last week and spoke a little bit about your research, but it's really, really, really cool to see it all laid out like this. If a little sobering, but that's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
When we met last week, you brought up the topic of like charismatic animals. And I know you referenced that fish biomass was one variable in the creation of utility.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask, first of all, was there any ability to capture if the presence of specific species influenced utility or snorkeling behaviors or recreational diving presence? And if so, did any species stand out as particularly charismatic?
So it wasn't by species on the background of the REM utility model. They had it as resource fish biomass. And resource fish biomass included specific ones for considered by NOAA as having recreational and like cultural significance for the for Hawaii system, I think. They drew from that. 'Cause they had various different ones. They had resource fisheries and a different type of classification, but that just grouped of fish together. But we do model various fish in the Atlantis model. We could incorporate this and see how those values change under these scenarios as well. But it's more of a grouping of resource fish that I wouldn't be able to tease out which one. But I could group them together at least and see how changes in that fish biomass impacted welfare. And that might be, I tried to do it at one point, but.
Yeah, because I was, thank you for your response. I was just thinking with regards to like, if divers and recreators know that a certain species or a certain aspect of that fish biomass is more present in one than the other, it might influence the number of trips.
No, right, yes, like Stark's Cove, right?
For sure.
Yeah, exactly, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Thank you.
and it would hopefully be picked up in that NOAA data set, especially the in the Oahu one. I should double check to see if it's bigger than the rest of the area.
So we do have a comment in part in answer to your question, Ernest, from Kirsten Olson, who is the PI on this
Yes.
project.
Mhm.
And so she says we tested charismatic megafauna in the original paper, but data are hard to come by. We only had large swaths of areas where turtles were known to be. So you can follow up with Kirsten to ask that, to further explore that. The next question we have online is from Helen Hosted. Who is the intended target audience for this research? I feel like it could be interesting for the housing market and tourism as well as policymakers, but the coral loss is also very relevant for the individuals living here.
Oh, yeah, I think that, so for this type of research, I really do see, especially with the trying to incorporate the environmental justice aspect in here, this is what I'm really hoping for, is to highlight communities that 40% of like the designated IRA and these particular kind of mitigation community-based ones are designated to communities that I listed out. And this would be a highlight to show that are more susceptible to higher welfare loss under various scenarios, that we should invest in the areas that especially they are located in, that we have in this model to show those ones are impacted under these scenarios. And that's kind of where I see hopefully the impact to be. Yeah.
Is there another question in person?
Actually, it's just like looking at the SSP one.
Mhm.
Either or the coral reef by 2050, so and then the present value water, the image they show. I was wondering, because you said the population was multiplied in the equation, which makes the populations, so the population and the present value increases and therefore something. But then the SSP3, which also has like much lower population predicted by 2050, has the same sort of dip in the same way. Wonder just when you.
Oh, like here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that I think it's a product.
Sorry, before you answer the question, for the online audience, can you repeat a summary of the question?
Okay, oh shoot, okay.
Or
Yeah.
if Ashley can repeat
Yeah,
it.
yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Just wondering, like, when you're looking at the equation, the data, is there any like hypothesis assumption of why that dips the same?
So I think the question ends up coming up, okay, so let's see if we can, okay. SSP1, SSP2 have differing, on this graph have differing points of when they drop, right? And why would that be? Somewhat of this, I think, has to do, okay. If we look at our model, the reason why this graph it has this huge drop and then it kind of slowly brings back up is a net present value issue. Net present value, when you measure it out way to the future, you're just valuing the losses in the future a lot less. That's the problem with discounting. This is an intergenerational issue. So that's why it looks like it's recovering. That's not coral reef recovering. That's just the welfare loss inherent part of the discount rate. Now, the reason why I think it drops, I have to dive in versus like this graph that kind of shows this steady decline. It's these kind of drops right here, those bigger ones that end up when aggregating close and the discount rate is only a time step, like say 10 out or 3 out, those become bigger drops. because they're weighted more than we weight today more than we weight tomorrow whenever we discount. And so those become more pronounced. And the other issue, I think, because this kind of was asked like in that lab one,
Yeah.
I think it could also be because I'm only looking at the near shore environment. And so I'd have to verify, but the Atlantis boxes are all of these, and I'm only looking at the near shore, like certain 100 meters. And so that could be a remnant of just what's projected in the near shore versus the coral quality in these ones that are further away that might have less, you know, runoff from the influences of the land, that could be impacting and making that kind of a lot worse.
We have another online question from Ellen White. Just wonder if the dependence on the quality of coral cover or health is in your model is not overestimated. This is because a good portion of coastal and beach recreation in Hawaii is not directly associated with reef health as much as water quality, waves, beach conditions, seeing a few fish, etc.
So I mean, that would come back to the other modeling prior, and what we had in here, I mean, we tried to, I mean, one of the things with surf, I think they note this in the original paper, was that like surfing had this like inverse relationship to, like, now I can't remember which variable it was. But that like areas with surfing aren't necessarily good for snorkeling, and that kind of popped out within the various different kind of makeup, right? So you have pebble, man-made beaches, the beach length. We could incorporate more coastal site attributes within this type of model to be able to control for that. But yeah, that would be an issue with the, I guess, rerunning and getting a new survey to estimate conditions, because this is a snapshot over just, you know, a period when the survey was conducted, which I think is the problem with all surveys inherently, is that you only get a snapshot. The mobility data that we're working with, that's like the new cool thing. And we might be able to do some more really like on the spot tied to actual recreational behavior and condition at a beach. But that would have to be a new model itself.
Any other questions from in the room? So I have a question for you, follow-up question. So these numbers are huge from a dollar value. And when you think about how that translates into the actions you might want people to take, either justifying the actions with these numbers or using them to fund work or justifying policies or something, is there kind of a diminishing return aspect of like, the number's just so big that past a certain point, do you even need to fine tune your model more? Because it's just gonna get bigger and we're already overwhelmed and we're doing the best we can. I mean, is there, I don't know.
I mean, if you want me, so I'll just say this, calculating, let's say snorkeling in coral reef, right? Significant. For one person, this model says about it's worth 30 cents a day, which necessarily for one person to have nice beaches is not that crazy of a suggestion. And then we're just applying that across the population and changing it through inherent in this model. So it's not like a massive number. It's when you aggregate it across all of your people, that's when I guess it does get massive, but that's the issue, right? Like it's not just one person who's impacted by the coral reef quality declining, it's all of us. And those do come with inherent costs. The diminishing marginal utility of return, I think definitely has to do with this idea, sorry to probably give you a head spin while I'm like running through the various different locations, but is coming to this idea of like, I mean, I don't know, at certain levels, extreme biomass, I mean, like, is there, to say that the people in the future are gonna have a 30 cents value loss when they don't know what it was like when we experienced the coral cover, that might be an extreme thing. They won't even know what they're missing. So maybe we don't even apply that number to those populations since they don't know what it was like now. I don't know. That could be a way to bring this one back up and maybe a little bit over on there by just not valuing the future.
We don't have any other questions online. Do we have any further questions in person?
My question maybe sound a little crazy or I don't know. Just wanna ask if there's going to be like a rapid rising sea level or like any other form of like natural disaster like the earthquake or something, will that like impact the model or like to the coral reefs? Will there be any like impacts on the coral reefs and the economic values?
I mean, yeah, I think you would find that a lot, and like, I'd be really excited to do is like a hedonic or a housing model. So like looking at like sea level rise or erosion rates to the coastline and the impacts on housing values. You know, you're already seeing it here, North Shore and stuff, all that craziness. Those probably they wouldn't be in this model because we're just kind of doing a revealed preference of where everybody likes to go nowadays. But yeah, that would definitely probably be very present in the housing market to be able to derive those values. And I'd love to get at those. Yeah.
On the topic of environmental justice, and this is a resource that I didn't even know existed, so glad you included it earlier.
It's really
from the
cool.
White House, yeah, really interesting.
I'm sorry.
For a
I
lot
just want to
of-
get to show it again.
For a lot of, and I think the terminology was disadvantaged, but for a lot of disadvantaged communities, access to public sites is an issue. It's, you know, people might need to take off work to drive, which is difficult. People might have to drive, they might not have a car. I wanted to ask a little bit about, and I think you referenced just disadvantaged tracks that were maybe near a beach recreation site. But I wanted to ask how the accessibility of the disadvantage to public recreation lands was accounted for in this study, beyond just proximity, if at all. And I know this is a massive question to throw right at the end, so sorry about that.
No, I mean, well, the basis of the like a random utility model that I do is that is based on this. Is the idea that, you know, we have a limited amount of time and we have the income constraint, and then we have a distance constraint, cost to distance. So calculating, that's why I calculated all those distances across. So typically in the model in the background is probably going to say those who are close to these particular sites, that they're impacted worse. So like the closer the damage of the coral reef is to those communities, is going to impact those communities more so. So it's not necessarily in the model, but the only way I could so far think about it was how to just measure the difference across those communities and see if there's any difference by island, because it's all varying across the sites. Like, are you really close to where the ecological condition is being projected? But you have in the model unconstrained ability to go to any site. And so that's supposed to allow there to be a trade-off where you're like, okay, now what you've done, so let's say here, you've had worse. Now those people have to go a little bit further to get to a better quality site. And so that's kind of what's happening in the background of the random utility model that allows them to trade off and make these decisions and unconstrain them from just applying it only to that site, to that individual, but realizing that there's going to be this now added on cost to them to go to a new site that maybe is less impacted. And then within those little boundaries is how I just aggregate, or finding the average within it compared to the rest is how I'm going to be able to, or trying to make that pie for the community.
Thank you.
So we are at the end of our seminar time. I want to thank you for joining us on our first seminar of the semester. We do have an exciting lineup this semester. Next week, if you are interested in hearing a little bit more about the future, this is not for the faint of heart, but Chip Fletcher is going to be presenting next week for seminar, again, continuing kind of the impacts of climate change that we can expect over the next century. I do think this is a particularly important topic for our graduate students to be eyes wide open about. This is the future that you're living in, that your children and grandchildren are going to be living in. And so whether we love it or hate it, which I gotta say, I hate it, it does not look good in the future. You are all in a field of saying, what can we do about that, right? How can we prepare for that future? How can we try to reduce the impacts leading into that future? And so these talks, while they're difficult to face that reality, they're really important for people in our field to sit here and wrestle with. So thank you for being here. We had double the number online as what we're in the room today. So we appreciate all of you joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. There is an advantage to being in the room. We do have some refreshments. So anyways, we hope that you'll stick around and enjoy a conversation with Dr. Lowe Mackenzie. Thank you again. We'll see you next week.